Welcome to Men Who Understood the Times. We're excited to have you here today to talk about what 666 means. And to do that, we're going to start with a fun little video. Michael says he's seen it before, but it was, who knows, maybe 50 years ago. And Andy mentioned he maybe hasn't seen it before. So let's get into that video here.
Look at your M closely. There's a gap right here in the letter M. It's never connected. So you go into Hebrew. The letter Vav is also the number 6. Short top, long tail. Short top, long tail. You could have here in Hebrew 666 on the can. But my interest is the word monster. What do you see in the O? There's a cross.
Okay.
What has Christ got to do with an energy drink, let alone the name Monster? So I thought, well, maybe this is a Christian company then. BFC at the bottom of the can. Do you know what that stands for? That's the F word. Big can. In fact, they write it on the side of the can, so I know that's the F word.
Okay.
Now, do you know what a MILF is?
Yes.
That's on the box. MILFs dig it, and you will too. This is not a Christian company at all. So why would they have put a cross on the can? Here is the message. Antichrist. 666 in Hebrew. And then the Bible talks about the beast in Revelation. And look at Monster's ad. This is their statement. You see these M's everywhere. Hats, t-shirts, bumper stickers. Is there another agenda here? If God can use people and product, so can Satan. And look at it this way. Even if the M was not the issue, you cannot deny that that is a cross. And what is witchcraft? When the cross goes upside down. Bottoms up. And the devil laughs. Something to think about.
Wow.
This is how clever Satan is and how he gets into the Christian home and a Christian's life, and it breaks God's heart. Jesus said, my people perish for lack of knowledge.
So, Andy, Michael, tell me where she maybe has a point or where she's off base.
I'm completely persuaded. I believe everything she said.
Zach, I like it how you send these videos for Andy and I to watch ahead of time. We just ignore it, so we have to wait until we get here to look at it. It is interesting how people like her can weave everything in. I don't disagree with her that Monster Drinks is probably not a Christian company with the things that it has on its marketing. But when you take all these different pieces and you're trying to fit them into 666, again, I don't think I didn't do any research on Monster Drinks, and I don't drink that stuff. But I would think that they could be stealing that symbolism that we'll talk about later on the podcast of Revelation chapter 13, the mark of the beast, to use it in order to entice people to use their energy drinks. But I don't think it's the mark of the beast.
The mark of the beast is something that, I mean, certainly this company could be putting anti-Christian symbolism on their product. They could just be, trying to make it marketable and edgy, provocative. They could also be, anybody who's not for Jesus is against him. That's true. But I don't see this as being an extension of the mark that would be consistent throughout the entire New Testament era.
Yeah, I think if there's one decent point she made was she mentioned products and consumerism, but she said if God can work through a product, so can Satan. And she's not necessarily wrong about that, right? That's the whole idea of Romans 13 and Revelation 13, as you're fond of pointing out, Michael. God can use the government and Satan can use it too. So kind of some interesting connections there with 666. And we'll talk about what it actually is. It's not Monster, but we'll get to that later in the pod.
Unless it could be Monster Drinks if St. John had Monster Drinks available to him on the island of Patmos in the 1st century AD. All right. Well, We're going to be studying the second half of Revelation chapter 13. So John writes, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like the lamb, and he spoke like the dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast on his behalf. He causes the earth and those who make their home on it to worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. He performs great miracles, even fire coming down from heaven to earth in the sight of people. He also deceives those who make their home on the earth because of the miracles that he was permitted to perform on behalf of the beast, telling those who make their home on the earth to make an image for the beast who had been wounded by the sword but lived. This beast was also given the ability to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast spoke and caused whoever did not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He also makes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, in order that no one may buy or sell unless he has the mark, the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, because it is the number of a man. His number is 666. So, Andy, there's a lot of symbolism here with this beast out of the earth. Can you start explaining some of those various symbols?
Well, I'll start with the introduction to this section of the chapter with the beast out of the sea. There's actually relatively little symbolism right away, right up front. It's important symbolism. It's very, very strong, but it's not nearly as thoroughly descriptive as the beast coming out of the sea. But the gist is there's the fewer horns than what the real lamb has in chapter 5, verse 6. The real lamb had 7 horns, 7 eyes, maybe obviously an allusion to the gospel promise. This poser does not have that, and definitely shows itself then to be diametrically opposed to the lamb. It spoke like a dragon, John says. So there's something fierce, not about its appearance necessarily, but fierce about its speaking, which is how the true identity of this beast is going to be known.
Yeah, so he has 2 horns like the lamb, so he's going to resemble the Lord, but he is a fake Christian. Because he speaks like the dragon. So he looks like the lamb, but he speaks like the dragon. So those are some clues on who this beast represents. And later on in Revelation chapter 16 and 19, he's called a false prophet. So he's a monster in sheep's clothing. So Zach, what about this line where John writes, he exercises all authority of the first beast on his behalf. He causes the earth and those who make their home on it to worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. What is that talking about?
So we just need to put into perspective the entirety of Revelation, I guess 12 and 13. The dragon stands on the shore, and then he brings up these 2 beasts. Revelation is telling us here that the devil has 2 great allies in its mission to destroy the church. The first was the beast out of the sea, which is the anti-Christian forces of secular government. And then the second is this beast out of the earth, which is going to be the apostate church, or even more specifically, the Antichrist, which is why it looks like a lamb. It looks like someone who would follow Jesus, right? Jesus is the shepherd. We are the sheep. It's trying to look like Christ. It's trying to look like those who follow him, but it's not. It speaks like a dragon. It speaks for the devil. And this second beast, which looks like the lamb, is exercising the authority of the first beast, which the first beast got its authority from Satan, right? So Satan gives its authority to the first beast gives its authority to the second beast, and they're all in cahoots. They're all working together for the same goal, the same purpose of attacking the church, of tearing down Christ's church. And so everything that this first beast does, it will be looking as though it's a lamb, but its purpose, its goal is in line with the dragon. Its purpose and goal is in line with that first beast. And that's all it really means, that it's exercising the authority of the first beast. It's doing the same thing as the first beast.
And then John goes on to explain that it causes fire to come down out of heaven. And there, I think of where the prophet Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 1, that Elijah was about to be forcibly taken by King Ahaziah, and Elijah calls down fire from heaven and burns up Ahaziah's men. And then later on in 2 Kings 18, where Elijah calls down fire from heaven in order to burn up the sacrifice on Mount Carmel. So here is a beast that appears to be able to perform miracles like God is able to perform miracles. So Zach touched on this, Andy, but if you want to build on it, what does this beast represent? And then tie in with its allies.
If the beast coming out of the sea represents Satan's pollution and manipulation of anti-Christian authorities who use corrupt politics to oppose the church, or politicians who, or I should say, any anti-Christian authorities who oppose the gospel, then maybe a simple way to understand the beast coming out of the earth is anti-Christian religion, which is most succinctly summed up in one false teaching. We'll get to that in a moment. But anti-Christian religion, religious powers that oppose the true gospel, that oppose the true Christian church during the course of the New Testament era, which of course would not exclude then the Roman papacy, but would also include many other false teachings, false belief as well. And Mike, just so you know, with regard to the fire coming down from heaven in full view of men, there's a very large megachurch here in Vegas called Central Christian that brings fire in the form of Cirque du Soleil acts into their worship, especially around Christmas time. I want you to know that that's probably a direct fulfillment of this prophecy.
Wow.
And I'm not being facetious at all.
Yeah. Well, Lord willing, if we were able to have our Men Who Understood the Time conference next spring in Las Vegas, we'll have to go over and take a gander at that. So then, Zach, how does this beast force people to worship the other beast and kill those who refuse? Because John writes in verse 12, he causes the earth and those who make their home on it to worship the first beast. So if, like Andy has said, and you had alluded to, that this second beast coming out of the earth is anti-Christian religions. How does it tie in with that beast out of the sea, governments of the world, in order to force people to worship the governments?
Well, maybe just looking at a specific example of what the dragon's voice might be. Andy mentioned that it's anti-Christian religion or Christian heresy. When Islam first was getting its footing, it was viewed then as an anti-Christian heresy because Islam held on to parts of the Bible, right? They say they're descended from Abraham. They say Jesus is a prophet, though they deny that he's God. They deny that he ever died on a cross, right? They deny all those things about Christianity, but they hold on to parts of it as well. So that they were viewed as Christian heresy. Islam could be seen as this lamb that is working for the first beast, in that in Islam, their government and their religion really is one. And they were literally trying to destroy Christianity. They were marching on Europe, trying to destroy the Christian nations and conquer the Christian nations and force them to worship a false god, to bring them into their kingdom and to worship something that is not God. That maybe is just one example of people literally being forced to worship the beast. But there's other ways it happens as well. We already mentioned the miracles, right? These great signs that are meant to give legitimacy to the first beast. The second beast is performing these miracles. There are many so-called miracles, say, in the Catholic Church that many Catholics point to say, this is why our religion is the true one, because look at all these miracles. Now, when it comes to miracles, miracles can be a marker that true doctrine is there, but you also need true doctrine to support that it's a real miracle. If you don't have true doctrine, then it's not a legitimate miracle. This is something that Moses wrote about in Deuteronomy chapter 13. I'll read those passages. If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him, serve him, and hold fast to him. Notice what's not written there, that the miracle never happened. It did happen, and the false prophet was using it to pull the people away from what was true. And so that's what we need to be aware of. When there's a miracle, don't just blindly say this proves the truth of whoever's advancing it. You need to look at the doctrine, because that's what is the one thing that never changes and the thing that we must hold fast to, the truth about Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I think throughout history, you can see these two beasts working together, starting with maybe the Egyptians, because you had the Pharaoh was supposedly one of the gods, along with their sun god and so forth. And then you had to force people to worship the Egyptian gods, but that was part of their religion. Daniel, in the book of Daniel, you've got King Nebuchadnezzar, who is king, but he's also a god. He has people like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trying to force them to worship his statue. Think of Caesar. He was a god, and so that he is overseeing the Roman government. Here in Americas, it would be like the Incas and the Mayans, whatever kind of government they had, but they also had their religion. So the two of them are tied together. Andy, where do you want to go with this? World religions, world governments, and maybe even touching again on the Roman Catholic Church throughout history.
So human governments don't always lurch towards religion with embrace, right? So they don't always try to present themselves or to exert their authority in a way that is religious. One of the things that makes this beast so demonic is that it gives a religious intonation to earthly powers. And so, you have earthly powers that exert their authority against the gospel, but they do so in a way that has the veneer of good morality, when in fact it's actually demonic immorality. And that's one of the things that's so devastating about this beast's work, and so difficult for us to discern and guard against, especially in our preaching and teaching and outreach to people. You have to try to borrow a phrase from the Marxists, you have to kind of deconstruct how their worldview has been distorted by the collaboration and then compulsion, the coercion, I should say, of these two beasts working together.
So, Andy, do you think it could be communist Soviet Union, communist China, in that there is no God, like the ones I was using, but it makes the government their God, and so they have to worship those governments? Would that be examples of this kind of thing that St. John is talking about?
Well, I don't know, Mike, are you trying to set the ball right on the tee for me?
Well,
so
I don't want you to swing it.
The answer is absolutely. Yeah, the answer is that absolutely that could be included. There are myriad examples, since these visions cover the span between Jesus' ascension and Jesus coming again. But the intimate affair between anti-Christian religion and anti-Christian government absolutely manifests itself in an obvious way when you have socialistic and communistic rule.
And Zach, as Lutherans, we would say that this also is applying to the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church, of the Antichrist. Because St. Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 and 10, the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, with every kind of miracle, that is, with false signs and wonders, and with every kind of unrighteousness that deceives those who are perishing because they refused to love the truth and so be saved. So how might the Roman Catholic Church have worked with the government in Luther's day in order to squash Lutheranism?
Well, the Catholic Church actually was doing this before Martin Luther showed up on the scene.
Right.
And let's just start with why exactly the Roman papacy can be considered this beast. And it's because the Roman papacy denies explicitly the doctrine of justification by faith alone. After Martin Luther was dead, they held the Council of Trent, in which the Catholic Church deemed anyone to be cursed if they denied that you are saved by faith and works. If anyone says you're saved by faith alone, let them be cursed. So says the Council of Trent. And so the Catholic Church does deny explicitly justification by faith alone. And so when we identify them with this beast, then, right, looking like a lamb, right, they present themselves as the Church of Christ on earth, the one true church. And yet their words are laced with venom. It's poisonous words that deny justification. And so then when someone like Jan Hus comes along and says, actually, we should just rely on scripture rather than church tradition, they burn him at the stake. When Martin Luther shows up and say, actually, Christ's righteousness is imputed to us through faith alone, they sign his death warrant, and again, working with the government. There was the Diet of Worms. Luther comes up, he's told to recant. He says, here I stand, I can do no other, God help me. And then the Catholic Church, in cahoots with King Charles, they sign his death warrant that anyone can kill Martin Luther whenever they find him. Right? So they're working together there.
And as you're talking about the false teachings in the Roman Catholic Church, I have a lot of members in my congregations I've served at have been ex-Catholics. Half of my family have been ex-Catholics or are still Catholics. So I understand the Roman Catholic teaching very well. And everything that you said, Zach, about the teaching of the Catholic Church, that's not just historical 500 years ago. It is very prevalent today. I listen to Michael Knowles, so he's a conservative Christian podcaster. Like him a lot, very Catholic, but he'll say after someone has died, well, we should still pray for their soul because we can maybe help him along. Okay, that's Roman Catholic teaching. In some of the people I have ministered to, they'll say, well, yeah, Jesus did it all, but I know I still have to do this to get out of purgatory and so forth. So, and I try to explain to them, if you add anything to the works of Jesus, you're subtracting the work of Jesus, what he did for you on the cross, but it's still there. And so anything that it is taking away from the true Lamb's work. So Zach, what power does the mark of the beast have on people? So here, whether it's a monster drink and so forth, what is 666 and this mark of the beast?
Well, Mike, if I could just interrupt, sorry, Zach, to cut in just a little bit. I just want to circle back with an explicit, tangible example of what you talked about with the Holy Roman Papacy or the unholy papacy. Listen to this for a moment. This document reads, the plan of salvation includes those who acknowledge the Creator. In the first place, amongst these are the Mohammedans, Islam, Muslims, who, professing to hold the faith of Abraham along with us, adore the one and merciful God who on the last day will judge mankind. Nor is God far distant from those who in shadows and images seek the unknown God. Those also can attain to salvation who, through no fault of their own, do not know the gospel of Christ or his church, yet sincerely seek God and moved by grace, strive by their deeds to do his will as it is known to them through the dictates of their conscience. Nor does divine providence deny the helps necessary for salvation to those who, without blame on their part, have not arrived at an explicit knowledge of God and with his grace to live a good life. Whatever good or truth is found amongst them is looked upon by the church as preparation for the gospel. And I have more documentation to prove how it says the same about Hindus and Muslims, Hindus and Buddhists as well. Where does this come from? This is from the dogmatic constitution on the church, Lumen Gentium, that's basically the light to the Gentiles, solemnly promulgated by His Holiness Pope John Paul VI on November 21st, 1964. Catholics worship and adore Pope John Paul VI because he was the one who opened up Catholicism or salvation beyond the Catholic Church. And liberal Catholics at the time were enamored with that pronouncement. So here you have explicitly stated on paper the belief that you do not need the exclusive gospel of Jesus Christ to save you, in spite of the fact that Jesus himself says, "No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life."
Everything we've been learning about the dragon and the beast, they are aping God. They are imitating God. That's why the dragon has the 7 heads, to look like he has the authority of God, right? Because number 7 is for God, and the devil apes that. So also with the beast out of the earth. And now here also with this mark, this number 666. It's used in the same way as we saw in Revelation chapter 7 with the 144,000 people who are saved. They are marked on the forehead. The mark is never described there. It's just, it tells us that they were sealed on the forehead. And so now the devil with his minion, the beast out of the sea, he's trying to imitate that. He wants to put his own mark on his own people. Also, we read that it will be on the forehead or on the hand. And so the 666 idea, it's falling short of God. He's trying to imitate God, but he can't go all the way. 6 is 1 short of the number 7, and it's repeated 3 times to really emphasize the fact that this is falling short of God. It falls triply short. No matter how much the devil tries to usurp God's power or authority or even his ability to mark people as his own, he is falling short.
Yeah, the 666, I think you said a triple failure. You know, he wants to be close to God, to destroy God's kingdom. And at Bethlehem, he came really close. He missed only 1 kid, but he will always fall short. Keep going.
Yeah. And so think of this almost as a cow's branding. Those who follow and worship the beast receive this branding on their hand or their forehead to mark them as belonging to the beast. But there is one important distinction besides just 666 falling short of that 7. In Revelation 7, the seal is never described to us. And so that leads me to believe that this is a spiritual seal that the Lord is putting on people, right? The Holy Spirit is our seal of promise, according to Paul. Paul wrote, "When you believed, you were marked in him with a seal, the promised Holy Spirit, who is a deposit guaranteeing our inheritance until the redemption of those who are God's possession, to the praise of his glory." So when God seals us, he seals us in our baptism. He seals us with the Holy Spirit. And again, it's something spiritual. It's something you don't see. But now this seal that the devil is using, it's something that you can see. It is identifiable. It is to be read, 666, on the hand or on the forehead. And so that's not to say the seal in everyday life as we are looking for it in the world is going to be a visible 666 like on that monster cup. But it is going to be something that we can identify. We can see it, we can point it out, and we can say, there is the mark.
So Andy will say that, I've been a pastor for a very long time. And so I've had people that have asked me about 666, this mark for 30 years in the ministry, and they'll be wondering, is this a microchip under the skin? Is it a barcode? Is it a biometric identity system or Elon Musk's Neuralink and so forth? So what I always remind people is it has to be something that meant something to the Christians in that first century AD that St. John was writing to while he was in prison on the island of Patmos, and then also carrying through all the way through history, and not just here in America, here in the 20th or 21st centuries. Okay, so it has to be something, and it doesn't have to be the same thing, but it is something that is going to be limiting. And this is what he writes: he also makes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, in order that no one may buy or sell unless he has the mark, the name of the beast or the number of the name. So then, Andy, can you give some examples of where this beast had shown up on people around the world and again throughout history?
Sure. And to your question, you're absolutely right. Is it, say, Neuralink or a microchip? Well, no, not specifically. But to the extent that Neuralink or a microchip might be utilized by the government in cahoots with any anti-Christian religious influences to push this immorally on people, then it could be an extension of or an example of the beast's work, right? So that is true. But would we call that specific thing the mark of the beast? No, of course not. But could it be an indicator that the beast is alive and well and working? Yes.
And I think maybe before you go on, Andy, just a way to illustrate that is throughout the Bible, when we see examples of prophecy, it's very rare that it's fulfilled only one time. An example of being fulfilled once would be Isaiah chapter 7, a virgin will give birth to a child, right? That only happened one time. A lot of other prophecies, they are fulfilled and they're fulfilled again and they're fulfilled again. And so that's kind of what we're looking at with 666 here, just fulfillment, fulfillment, fulfillment.
Yeah, well said. And I'll key on that just for a moment and say, earlier on in my ministry, I used to say, well, the devil really doesn't need to waste his time on unbelievers at all, because he's already got them on his side. And so he really focuses all his attention on believers and tearing us down so that we'll, like misery loves company, so that we'll be miserable forever in eternity with him. But that's not really true, is it? Because the devil utilizes unbelievers who present themselves as believers. He uses them to oppose the gospel. So he's not done with unbelievers just because they're mired in unbelief. He still utilizes them to cause a lot of grief for believers. And historically, there are some examples of this. So for example, in the Roman Empire, they used to require a certificate which said that those who held the certificate had to burn incense to the Roman emperor. So there was a blurring of the lines of the religious and the political in that era. Just as there is today, when you think about how political authorities now have been accommodated by aspects or corners of American Christianity, such that they suggest that the right to abortion is something of a moral high ground. Like it's actually a moral thing to afford a woman the right to do something immoral, to murder her child. And now in Massachusetts, you can do it up to birth. I mean, it's absolutely sick. And that's just one example. But the connected example to that, and the reason why I lurched from ancient Rome to modern day America, is because in our political party system, which is not the same today as it has always been, and I'll get to that in my concluding remarks today. But you have to endorse and promote abortion as a platform party policy with at least one of our parties. So I'm not trying to bind a conscience and say you have to vote Republican, but But I am saying that in modern day America, in the Democratic Party, there are, without exception, you have to accept and approve of and even promote abortion as a prerequisite for that party. And that's got to concern an individual who's considering a run, especially on that ticket, or it's got to concern Christians in general who are involving themselves in the civil realm. Okay, then also membership in a communist youth organization was a requirement for attending university during World War II. So you couldn't, you basically had to join Hitler's youth if you wanted to get a higher education. And I have actually interviewed at least one source who grew up in that era. And this particular woman just said after the fact, we just did not realize everything that was going on and what the underlying agenda was. We can learn from history in that way to discern the times and to avoid allowing that same type of agenda from coming. Now, that said, even if we can't stop it, we can at least still discern it, right?
And I think that word you used before, Andy, of extension. I want our listeners to think about, well, what was going on in, say, 2020, 2021, that people could wear, people could receive, and then if they were able to receive that or they were wearing it, well, now they could be involved in commerce. But if they didn't have this, they weren't wearing this, well, now they couldn't go to work. They might be expelled from the military. They couldn't go on a cruise. They couldn't go visit their family. Pastors could not go visit their shut-ins or go to a nursing home or do a funeral and so forth. So those are all kinds of things of we got to be very careful. I'm not saying that it is the mark of the beast, but it could be an extension of the mark of the beast because it's religious organizations that are going along with political organizations and are limiting people on hearing the gospel and are limiting people on doing commerce. There's a story I read a week or so ago about some of our Lutheran colleges, confessional Lutheran colleges, Bethany Lutheran College, which is ELS, Concordia colleges that are LCMS, and that they have nursing programs, and then they are requiring something to be injected into them in order to be able to participate as clinical partners in these different hospitals. And if they don't do this, well, then they're not going to be able to be involved in commerce. So we need to be very careful. I don't want to bind consciences, but as confessional Lutheran Christians we have to be very careful on what are we in any way participating in allowing the government to put something in us, on us, that will limit the commerce and then hearing of the gospel. Zach and Andy, if you want to touch on anything else before we move on to the last point.
Yeah, I think that's why John says in verse 18, this calls for wisdom. For that old German lady that Andy knew, she said we didn't see it at the time. It called for wisdom at the time to see what it was. And, maybe even going back to, COVID, the masks and the vaccines, I'd even be willing to say, yeah, maybe at the time for those 3 years, like 2020 to 2022, when it was really being pushed, yeah, that was the mark of the beast, because you could not participate in a lot of things if you were not doing those things and receiving those things. I think it's changed now. I'm not sure. I'm not. I'm a pastor. I work, at a church. I don't know. Maybe other companies still are requiring it, but perhaps that has fallen out of being, pushed as hard or required quite as much. But at the time, in those 3 years, it called for wisdom to see what it was.
Well, just to answer your question, and I'll be brief.
Yeah.
We've hit on the papacy. We've hit on the symbiotic, unspiritual relationship between religious authorities and governmental or political, but we should not fail to talk about the social gospel, Islam, the new age garbage that is out there I mean, a lot of times, maybe you don't get this, but maybe you do. But in Vegas, a lot of times, because the megachurch footprint is so vast here, we'll actually be accused of dead orthodoxy because of the lack of, or the perceived lack of obvious spirituality or engagement, or like, feeling, say, in worship. It's like, well, I get good feels out of some of our deep Lutheran hymnody, say, but if you don't see visible signs of the Spirit working, then somehow you're less spiritual than in those places where you can actually see the Spirit's working. Well, are you sure that you're seeing the Spirit work? Or are you seeing the beast of the earth at work? Because he's got plenty of aces up his sleeve and rabbits in his hat. So I just wanted to make sure to say that there is a lot of different fulfillments of this. And as Zach said, we should expect more.
We need to first recognize the beast. We need to be able to mark the beast. And as we've mentioned, it shows up in all different kinds of places. But there might be one common theme that links all of these different iterations of the beast together. And perhaps that we could call that works righteousness. Think back to COVID. How many people felt they were so righteous for wearing the mask or for getting the vaccine, and told you, in order for you to be righteous, you have to do the same thing? Works righteousness is the human religion. It is the human religion. It sneaks into wherever it can. It's the opinion we have of the law. I must do something in order to save myself, to make myself righteous before God. And that's why this mark is so powerful to work on people, because it appeals to that opinion that I can do something in order to be saved, in order to become righteous. To oppose it, then, we need to, one, see this where it is. We need to see the works righteousness when it's pushed on us. For example, in today's day and age, and in today's Christianity, especially in America, there are several flavors of Christianity that promote this works righteousness in the language of the progressive liberal agenda. Think of those signs you see in people's yards, right? That tell you right away, oh, that's a leftist. In this house, we believe love is love. Women deserve rights. Immigrants are people, right? Whatever it is. There are a lot of churches that have assumed this idea. For us to be a good and righteous people, we need to support abortion. We need to support the transgender ideology. We need to support homosexuality. We need to support these things in order to be righteous. And that really is the lamb that speaks like the dragon. That is the second beast, which is going to then use its authority to support that first beast, which it often does. You see these churches working in conjunction with the government to promote those venomous ideologies.
Yeah, and my example would be, think about if your middle schooler, comes home crying because there's a bully in school. As dads, what are we going to tell our kid to do? Well, stand up to the bully, because the bully just wants to push people around, say bad things, intimidate, insult, threat. Well, the devil is the biggest bully out there, and that's all he does is he intimidates and he threatens, he insults us. He gets us to cower and become afraid. Just keep our head down, keep our mouth shut, just try and be nice, and then everything will be fine. But it's never fine. And the bully just keeps pushing and pushing and intimidating us. And so just like the advice we would give to our middle schooler to stand up to the bully, that's what we need to be doing. That we need to stand up to the bully, because God has given us the weapons to stand up to the bully. It is the gospel armor of Ephesians chapter 6. It is to use all of those tools, put on that gospel armor and get going to war. Sometimes that means we're going to have to physically punch the bully in the nose. But most of the time, it's just going to be wielding the sword of the Spirit and then hit the bully of Satan and all of his beasts with the sword of the Spirit, God's word, and not blunt that edge of the sword in any way, either law or gospel. Just come out swinging hard and to go after the devil. And what is the devil always going to do? The same thing any bully does. He's going to cower. We just have to not be afraid to go start swinging. Andy, what can confessional Lutherans do to oppose this beast and continue to promote Christ?
Well, track with me here. This is a mark you want to miss, right? You want to miss this work righteous mark. And to Zach's point, I'll just amplify his point about doing something. But it's a two-sided coin, this work righteous thing. The idea that you can appease a holy God by your efforts and works is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that works righteousness includes, of course, self-righteousness. My opinio legis, that's a Latin term for my opinion of myself in view of the law, which is always that, no, I may not be perfect, but I'm no Donald Trump. Or I may not be perfect, but I'm no Barack Obama. I may not be perfect, but at least I got my vax. Or I may not be perfect, but at least I didn't get vaxxed. So that self-righteousness is an emanation or an extension of this thinking as well. And we want to be real guarded against that. So how can we miss this mark? Well, one of the ways we talked about discernment. And let me qualify this by saying none of us on this pod believe that we have some deeper, more Gnostic knowledge than everybody else. But what we do advocate for is that the scriptures are so sufficient and thorough that they can equip us to discern these times well, as hard as they may become. So recognize that the times we're in are not, they're not unique to history on the one hand, but they might be unique to our experience in our lifetimes. So let me quote August Pieper. He said that we Christians can expect the same, quote, error cropping up in ever new forms and extremes. In other words, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. We're going to face challenges in forms and in fashions and methods that are not unique to history, but they might be new and unique to us. And that's what makes them so challenging. And that's what makes the scriptures such a force to be reckoned with when it comes to our Christian living and to our Christian witness. So this weekend, tomorrow, I'm preaching on Matthew 16, where Peter makes his outstanding confession of faith that God the Father had revealed to him and given him by the power of the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says the gates of hell will not withstand the gospel. The English translation is a little bit lacking, in my opinion, because gates are not a proactive defense measure. They're a reactive, passive defense measure. But Jesus says the gates of hell cannot withstand the truth of Peter's confession, which means that Jesus is a juggernaut. It means the gospel is a battering ram. The gospel, no matter how intimidating these two beasts may seem, the gospel is more powerful. The gospel is more effective, which is why the devil, chases his tail and keeps on trying to pester us and persecute us. But the church never dies. The gospel never gets eradicated. It never gets snuffed out. It's because of the power of the gospel. So to that end, what can confessional Lutherans do to oppose the beast and to promote Christ? Okay, preach the gospel. Yes, that's true. But we might encourage preaching the truth of Christ, the truth of the gospel in its fullness, preaching the whole counsel of God. That doesn't mean pastors and teachers need to, do somersaults or gymnastics in order to be provocative. But when you preach thoroughly the scriptures, there are inevitable times where that will sound provocative. Don't worry about that. The gospel's more powerful. Don't worry about that. So, and then to that end, you don't want to equivocate. You don't want to compromise to the spirit of our age. Instead, you want to discern them. The last practical encouragement I would give is simply this, especially to maybe some of our more venerable readers. or listeners, I should say, this is not the time you grew up in America. It's very, very different. It's not a two-party system anymore. It's a last vestige of American republicanism versus a not so subtle creeping socialism. So this is a very different political arena. And I'm not suggesting it's it's like the death knell for us individually or as Christians or even for America. I don't know those things. Only the Lord does. But I think that the scriptures can help us discern these times and then help us to speak to these times with careful and concerted crafting of the truth. Because no, it's not our life's mission to oppose socialism necessarily. It's our life's mission to hold on to the gospel and to spread it. But we also don't need to willfully invite it in. We don't need to willingly invite it in because we know what damage it does to individual souls and we love our neighbor. And even one of our sainted church fathers, CFW Walther, spoke against the kind of evils that socialism and communism bring. So I think it's important that we recognize the times are different. We don't get overwhelmed by them. We trust the gospel and we keep on preaching it, but we preach the fullness of God's revealed will with courage and confidence that it will accomplish what the purpose for which God sent it.
Yes, you were just talking about these are not the times that we grew up in. So I went out hiking this last weekend with Shad, who is 51, I'm 55, trying to do some hard things that other guys couldn't do. We did a 28-mile hike to Bomber Mountain. It was like a 3,500-foot climb over 2 days, 28 miles, carrying 50-pound packs for all but 4 of those miles. We finally just set the packs on the side. When we got to the really steep part of Bomber Mountain, Shad was on the Thirsty podcast with me that we recorded this week too. But he had a point, is exactly what you were saying, Andy, because you guys have done enough hiking. You know, in the beginning, you're talking a lot, and then when you get tired, you don't talk so much. But he had said this because we try and do hard things that other guys aren't doing, especially our ages. But we talked about hard religion too, and he made the same point you did, that it is not. He said that we had kind of grown up in a time. I was born in 1970, so in the 70s and 80s, early 90s, Christianity was still popular here in America. That we became soft as Christians. Everything was good. People were going to church or church shopping and so forth. Christianity is involved in politics in both parties and so forth. But now it's not so good. Now people are not eager to go to church. Now people are opposing Christianity. There was a podcast, I heard just a clip yesterday where the lady was saying that Islam, they supported, that's fine, but it's, her phrase was Erica Kirk Christianity. That's what is the death knell of America and so forth. So just outlandish comments, and people like these kinds of things. These are the times that we're living in. That's why this podcast exists. Men who understood the times, not that we understand the times, but that we're trying to apply God's word to these times that are unique to us, not unique in the history of the world. And I'm preaching on that same text tomorrow, Andy, and I'm going with the same kind of theme. It's just the gates of hell, and that we are to be storming the gates of hell. And I'll end the sermon with a great quote from The Princess Bride. Have fun storming the castle. That's us. Okay, we are to have fun storming the castle, the gates of hell. And Satan will cower when we come at him with all of the weapons of the gospel. And it's not just pastors doing it, but all of us as Christians going out and telling other people the message of Christ. And it is a glorious thing when we do that. When some of my teens in my congregation, when they tell me they're praying with other kids, after a wrestling practice, or they're college students that are counseling other people that are dealing with depression and thinking about suicide. That is storming the gates of hell. So just keep on doing that. Anything else you guys want to bring up before we wrap this episode up?
I'd mention maybe one more thing about opposing this beast. And I think it becomes important for us to oppose false doctrine at every step, to never concede an inch in that fight. Many churches in our country have given into the progressive Marxist creep and accepted a lot of those premises and joined themselves to the secular authority of our time. And so we can't do that. One example would be that our synod cannot accept even the premise of transgenderism, which means we can't use the pronouns. Because if we accept the premise, we are giving in a little bit to that progressive creep, and the spirit of the age is gaining ground. And as Michael just brought up, this analogy of storming the gates of hell, we don't want to let hell encroach into our side of the battlefield. No, we are the ones encroaching on their side, right? So we aren't giving up even an inch. We stand firm and we even advance.
Yeah, or another example, what you said with transgenderism, don't even give an inch of putting something in front of Christianity, like saying, well, I'm a gay Christian. Okay, now we've given an inch and saying, now my identity is something other than Christ. And anything you add to that, it's diminishing Christ. Andy, do you want to say anything else to wrap up?
Only my last comment on, a lot of times the devil is so simplistic in his attacks, hard as they might be for us to discern them. God's solution is always more effective and powerful, and frankly, simple in a superior way. So if the devil's gonna manipulate us and woo us with the temptation of work righteousness and self-righteousness, then what's the antidote? What's the number one arrow in our quiver for Christian witnesses? The alien righteousness given to us by Christ. The active obedience of Jesus Christ is the ultimate promise that can dispose of and dispel these lies of Satan.
Amen, Andy. Let's dispose and dispel of those lies of Satan. If you've made it this far, you are one of the few and the proud who get to be told that we were having some audio issues, and Mike's audio cut in and out a couple of times, and he closed out our podcast with one more thing to say, and so I'm going to say it for him. He wanted to encourage other pastors and Christian lay people to be bold when talking about these kinds of issues that the devil's beasts try to force upon Christ's church, to be bold in speaking what is true. And I want to encourage you to be bold, to hit that like button, to comment, and to subscribe if you have not already done that. Your support means a lot to us, and it's allowing us to upgrade our equipment and our software so that hopefully this loss of audio doesn't happen again. So God be with you all as you go and storm the gates of hell.